Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. Each week, we address issues of timely and timeless concern, with newsmakers and the journalists to report on them, with artists, writers, scientists, educators, social scientists, government leaders. We speak to each one to one. I'm delighted to welcome author and writing teacher Susan Shapiro to the program. In her courses and books, she has helped hundreds of aspiring writers get their articles and books published, and during her fascinating life has perfected the art of being both a successful mentor and a successful protege. Her many books include Speed Shrinking, 5 Men Who Broke My Heart, Lighting Up, Secrets of a Fix-Up Fanatic, Only as Good as Your Word, Writing Lessons from My Favorite Literary Gurus, and Overexposed, a novel that has just been published by Thomas Dunn Books of St. Martin's Press. Welcome.
Thank you.
Tell me about your upbringing and how you decided that you wanted to be a writer.
I grew up in West Bloomfield, Michigan, and one of my favorite lines that I always say to my students is the first piece you write that your family hates means that you found your voice, because I'm from a conservative, I adore my parents and they were very encouraging, but they didn't necessarily love it when I came home quoting Sylvia Plath. And I didn't fit in the regular public school system, and thank God they listened to me and let me go to a school for artsy misfits where
you met Jack Zucker.
Where I met Jack Zucker, who turned me on to poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And, and where I'm from, it was conservative Republican Jewish suburbia, so basically you never say what you're really thinking or the Cossacks will come get you. So all of a sudden I just would hear these, these amazing lines like, dying is an art, I do it exceptionally well, or I'm tired, everybody's tired of my turmoil. And I just fell so in love with the confessional poets and quoted them and just couldn't wait to write like it. And thank God Jack Zucker really took me on and helped me. And so that was my first, that was the beginning.
Now, you went to college at the University of Michigan, came to New York, where you went to graduate school, the MFA program.
Yes, at NYU.
At NYU. When you got here, did you feel you had suddenly come home in New York?
I did, and my parents are New Yorkers. And actually the joke was that I always felt like I wore all black clothes and I smoked and drank and quoted Bob Dylan and Sylvia Plath and Maya Angelou and sort of had an edge, and in Michigan I was thought of as a dangerous radical. And at NYU I sat in Washington Square Park the first day and noticed everybody was wearing black and talking about being a misfit in their childhood and smoking and drinking. And in New York in Greenwich Village I found I was barely mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and I thought when I sat in Washington Square Park the first day, I thought, okay, this is what was wrong with the first 20 years of my life. I was switched at birth. I was supposed to have been born here. And my mom went to City University.
Really?
Yes, and she loved it. And so I think she just told me too many times how great New York was, because I just moved here and I was like,
right.
Oh my God, of course.
Now, after you got your master's degree, it seemed like you almost immediately got a job at the New Yorker, which is, I think everybody who wants to write, wants to be at a place where there are other writers in that kind of atmosphere. How did that come about? I mean, was it just, was it contacts? How did that happen?
Okay, so I did my master's at NYU, and I spent $30,000 for the degree and came out loving it, loving the program, and I didn't even know how to write a cover letter to send out any of the work that the Nobel Prize-winning, Pulitzer Prize-winning poets and fiction writers had told me. So my parents are like, okay, now move home, because we're not paying your rent anymore. New York, my dad used to say that it was, you could buy a building in Michigan for what it cost to share a rental in New York. He's like, come home. So I ran to my favorite professor. I'm like, help, how do I stay here? How do I make a living? And I said, I type 100 words a minute. Maybe I'll get one of those editorial assistant jobs. I knew someone at Soap Opera Digest at the time. So I said, what do you think? I'll get a job at Soap Opera Digest. He said, I think you're an idiot. You just spent $30,000 to study with Nobel, Pulitzer Prize-winning poets, and that's your favorite magazine? So I said, no, The New Yorker's my favorite magazine. Are they going to hire me? And he picked up the phone and they hired me. And I was a peon for $13,000 a year.
Now, this is one of your professors at NYU?
At NYU.
Okay.
Yes. In fact, I always tell that story because it led me to believe that a teacher's job shouldn't only be in the classroom, and that's part of the reason I've had so many fantastic writers and mentors who helped me in real life issues, getting jobs and paying your rent and getting paid and getting agents, that I feel like that's my job, and that's when it started.
Now, you worked for the librarian at the New Yorker.
It was the New Yorker library, yes, and it was Helen Stark. It was an editorial assistant job where we would summarize and type up every single thing in the magazine into little file cards. But, you know, within the first week, I had met Ian Fraser and Pauline Kael and you know, basically Garrison Keillor. I mean, every fantastic writer and editor in the country, I think, was in and out of the office. So it was the most amazing job in the world. I had it for 4 years.
Did all of the little peons at the New Yorker, did they all want to be writers?
Absolutely. In fact, I always make a joke that the very fantastic, amazing editor who assigned 2 of my books, book reviews at the New York Times Book Review that reviewed them really well, was a fellow peon that was sitting next to me in 1983. So everybody went on to write or edit or have really cool jobs. So it was just the most amazing. People made a joke because Roper, the school I went to where I met Jack Zucker, they used to call it like a school for weird, gifted, artsy misfits. And actually, being at the New Yorker sort of seemed like a continuation of that. It was just so exciting.
What did you learn from Helen Stark? She was one of your mentors.
She was amazing. She was a mentor, and she taught me a lot of things. I would say that never give up. And also she used to do this amazing thing, which was she really had a very structured job of the way you were supposed to do. You know, Mondays we cut and pasted, and the cartoons, and Tuesdays we did the poems. And basically, I figured out a way in 8 hours to do the whole week's work so I could do my own writing, and that was okay with her. And then she would read my writing, and she liked it.
And you were the person who brought the glue stick to the New Yorker,
Yes,
right?
that was what I'm famous for, is that they used to have this big goopy glue that they used since World War II. And she went out of town for a week and made the mistake of leaving me in charge. And so my lasting legacy, I did sell something in the New Yorker, but my lasting legacy is really the glue, because when she was gone, I had the guys in the messenger office bring us glue sticks, and it was like hours. Or, you know,
and this is really to put articles in scrapbooks.
Yes, they still do it apparently, even though they have computer. So that was my legacy at the New Yorker.
What was the first piece you got published?
I think the first piece I got published was, my cousin Michael Greenblatt was an editor at the Aquarian. So literally the first week I was in New York, I sent him some poems and he put them in the Aquarian. So I was just, I say to my students, clips are like crack, you can't just get one. Oh my God. So that was the most exciting thing that ever happened, was literally right when I got to New York, you know, even though it didn't pay. So that was the first one. The first piece I got paid for, I think I did a piece for Cosmopolitan, used to have a column called Outrageous Opinions. And so I think I did one on a Michigan girls culture shock in the Big Apple, and I think I got $500 for it. And the joke was that all my friends from Michigan just thought I was so cool for being in Cosmopolitan. And then I got in, a mentor helped me get in the New York Times Book Review, and all my New York friends were, that impressed them.
I remember I once had an assignment to do a Cosmopolitan article, but it was about, not one of their traditional subjects, it was about domestic violence, you know, maybe battered women. And I wrote it, but then they wanted me to sort of glamorize it and sex it up, you know, as Cosmopolitan. And it wound up never making the cut. But you seem to have gone on a roll, gotten on a roll with your pieces early on.
I was very lucky. I mean, just for an example, my new book, Overexposed, starts with an NYU student who just gets a job at a magazine that's very like the New Yorker, and she bumps into a woman, it's a true story, who she becomes very close with, and that it's based on my sister-in-law, Monica, and she was the daughter of Richard Yates. And so the first minute I met her, I remember I said, what was it like growing up in the village with a famous fiction writer father? And she was like, what was it like growing up in the Midwest in a normal family, you know, with a doctor dad? I'm like, why would anyone want to know that? And then she wound up marrying my brother and moving to Michigan and having 4 kids in 6 years and becoming the daughter my mother always wanted. But before she did that, I actually think that Cosmopolitan piece that I mentioned, I said, take a look at something I'm writing. And she read it. I remember she said, this is kind of dumb, sent it to my editor friend at Cosmo, and they printed it. So she became a mentor, and you know, her dad had a fantastic literary agent who she introduced me to, and she took me to parties, and we met, you know, everybody cool in New York. And then at the New Yorker, I had many exciting mentors who helped me. You know, so I was very lucky that
So you
NYU
can't beat
professor.
contacts.
It's not only contacts, it's also, you know, a lot of the writers that helped me, I read their work, I was a big fan, I would go to readings, you know, and I think one of the things I teach in my mentor book, Only as Good as Your Word, is that, you know, don't write someone you want to be your mentor and say, I just graduated Phi Beta Kappa, you know, and here's these 8 brilliant pieces I wrote. You know, first pay respect and say, hey, I read your work, I admire your work, I went to your lecture, it was so fabulous, and then they'll be much more interested in you. So I was really, I mean, I was a groupie, but it was very serious, you know, and it was funny because a lot of my friends in Michigan were, you know, groupies for Billy Joel or Bob Springsteen, and I literally, I mean, anytime Joseph Brodsky was giving a reading, or Yehuda Amichai, or, you know, they're just amazing writers and poets that I could just see in right in Greenwich Village. So I used to go to readings all the time, and I think it was good karma. You know, it always, even if I was broke, I would, you know, I would rather not eat and be able to buy the poet's book and have them sign it. And I think that was a great start. In fact, I do say to my students, hang out with people you want to be. Like, what are you going to the bars with your lawyer friends if you want to be a writer? Every day in New York, by the way, at CUNY, at NYU, at the New School, Borders, Barnes & Noble, there's fabulous readings. McNally Jackson, every single night you could go hear another, you know, fabulous writer, editor speak. So
you also had a cousin, Howard Fast, who was very helpful to you.
Howard was amazing, and my favorite advice, I once told him that I had writer's block, and he said, plumbers don't get plumber's block. Don't be self-indulgent. Get to work. He said, a page a day is a book a year. And that really helped me. That was amazing. And he had written Spartacus and a lot of bestsellers. And I just thought that was a fantastic attitude, you know, which is you don't have a choice. Just wake up in the morning and do your job.
He also encouraged you to write books as opposed to articles.
He did because, you know, he had a lot of luck with novels, and it took me a while. You know, it was easier to do short pieces, but then all of a sudden it kicked in and I knew exactly what he meant. And actually, with Overexposed, I started it in 1995, and it recently got published, so instead of a book launch, we gave it a book mitzvah. And I had all the editors and agents who helped me come up to the candle lighting ceremony and light a candle to thank them for helping me over the years, but it took me a while.
Why did it take so long for that?
It was funny because I wrote the whole book. It was based on a magazine article, and I had a big agent who was all excited about the idea of 2 women who switch lives. And instead of writers, I made them photographers, which is how I got the title Overexposed. And then for the next 6 or 7 years, nobody bought it. And every editor, agent, and producer in the country, it seems, said it's really funny, not quite, not quite. And I do what I tell my students to do, which is if you have someone who'll tell you the truth, you know, go ask a mentor who's a real harsh critic. So I asked my mentor friend Laura, read it and tell me what's wrong. And she said, okay, I'm going to tell you what's wrong. She said, you have no imagination whatsoever. Stop writing fiction. And I went home crying, and she just said, put it away. I went home crying. I put it away. And she also said that 2 sister-in-laws wasn't the most exciting subject. I should write about sex, and that I was ambivalent about my sister-in-law because she'd become the daughter my mother always wanted. She said, you write better about people you love. So the next day, I listened to her. First I swore at her and thought she was wrong, and then the next day I woke up and started a memoir called 5 Men Who Broke My Heart, which was nonfiction about sex and people I love, and that was a huge breakthrough. And I wound up doing 5 nonfiction books in a row, and then finally, recently I found a fabulous editor who bought Overexposed, and actually the joke was that it took me until age 48 to write a happy, successful 26-year-old character that my 26-year-old editor liked.
But was it pretty much the original book, or was it a very different book?
Well, my editor was terrific because she really helped me update it. So things that had happened over 25 years, I kind of crunched into 7 years, and she really helped me with references because I would say something like Rhoda and Mary, and she would cross it out and write Gossip Girls.
Right.
So we definitely updated it, and also truthfully, I think what happened was, because it's 2 women who switch lives, and I guess at the beginning when I was writing it, it seemed that my sister-in-law had 4 kids and a great, my brother's fantastic, a doctor, and beautiful house, and my parents adored them, and I was really struggling. You know, I really couldn't make a living until I was 40. So I guess the early drafts maybe came off like sour grapes, or, you know, and then what happened, which was amazing, was that I finally got successful, you know, and was on the Today Show and had foreign rights and film rights. So by the time I went back to rewrite Overexposed, the single woman photographer who didn't get married winds up all of a sudden, she's wildly successful and on TV and having a great time. And then the book started to rock. You know, and it's funny because it's the only book I've written where I'm very happily married, but it's the only book I've written where I intentionally kept the heroine single. And so she's this single career woman, and her career is really exciting and really happening. And I was and a lot of my students were so thrilled, you know, to see a young woman that's just really having the most amazing career.
Wow. We're going to take a break. I'll be back with more with Susan Shapiro after the following messages.
I'm Jeff Gordon, warning parents about pertussis. What's that? Well, imagine a cough barreling through your infant's body at up to 100 miles per hour, with enough force to make him gasp for air. Again and again, for weeks, even months. Pertussis, or whooping cough, is potentially fatal. Now imagine you gave this to your baby. Parents most often spread pertussis, and even when babies themselves are vaccinated, they're probably not protected till they've had at least 3 doses. I'm working with March of Dimes to urge you to help protect your baby by protecting yourself. Ask your healthcare provider about the adult pertussis vaccine now, because we can't stop pertussis fast enough.
Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with writer and writing teacher Susan Shapiro, the author of Overexposed, published by Thomas Dunn Books of St. Martin's Press. So what was your first published book?
My first published book was 5 Men Who Broke My Heart, which was a memoir where I went back and re-met my top 5 heartbreaks of all time, and I wanted to find out what really went wrong in each relationship.
Well, you had a lot of courage to do that, because, I mean, I'd like to know I'd like to know what went wrong with the 10 men who broke my heart or whatever.
You know, it was amazingly illuminating, and it was very exciting. And I had this brilliant shrink who once said to me, "Love doesn't make you happy, make yourself happy, and then you find love." And that really wound up happening. In fact, interestingly, it kind of reinvigorated my marriage because I was so excited to get it published, and there was just it was so much fun. And then all of a sudden, I was really busy and I wasn't waiting around for my husband to make me happy. And it kind of so the book kind of fulfilled the message of the book at the same time.
And did the former boyfriends, did they tell you the truth?
Oh, they did. They did. In fact, one of them I asked if he would meet with me to talk about what happened 20 years earlier, and he said, "I would rather take out my own appendix with a bottle of Jack and a dull spoon."
Really?
And it was actually quoted on Oprah. He was very excited to have it quoted.
You mean then what?
Then talk about what happened in our relationship.
And so he did not?
He refused to see me, but he did, and I was really worried that would screw up the whole book, but then he agreed to do email. So he let me email him 20 questions, and I was so afraid that it wouldn't work, and it turned out it was the best one because he was really mean and nasty and did not want to speak with me at all. And actually, I'm working with a producer on the film version of it now, and everybody, that's still the favorite line of everybody, because the other ones were nice, and I would have lunch or dinner, and it was more realistic that somebody would not, someone married with kids would not want to talk about the relationship 20 years later.
Right. And in 1 year, I think you published 3 books in 1 year.
I had a great year. I had an amazing year. What I say to my students is I banged my head against the wall for 22 years, and then they started taking 6 months. And what happened was I published 5 Men Who Broke My Heart, and I found this amazing editor at Random House that I loved. And after I did 5 Men Who Broke My Heart, it takes 18 months for a book to come out, and I was in therapy with this brilliant shrink who helped me quit cigarettes, alcohol, dope, gum, and bread. And I always say, write about your obsessions. And so I was scrawling notes during the sessions, and right after they bought 5 Men, I wrote this book, Lighting Up, and I sold a few pieces, and it started getting pressed, and so they bought that right away. And then I teach a class at Holy Apostle Soup Kitchen with one of my mentors, Ian Fraser, and it's people who are formerly homeless and in prison and had drug issues, and everybody writes the most gorgeous first-person pieces, and I always thought it would make a great book. And a student of mine was married to a guy who ran Seabury Press, and he wound up publishing Food for the Soul, which was a collection of all the essays, and it was a charity. It was a charity book, and we did it with Reverend Elizabeth Maxwell, who runs the church, and that wound up coming out the same year. So it was very exciting.
Do you still teach that course?
We do.
Really?
We do still teach that class. Yeah, and it's again, hang out with people you want to be, because the way that it happened was I asked Ian Fraser if he would speak to a class that I was teaching at the New School, and he came, and he was fabulous. And as he left, he said, "Hey, do you want to come teach a class with me now?" And I thought it was because I was such a brilliant teacher, and he later told me I was the only other teacher he knew, and he needed someone for the program.
Your books seem to be on a wide range of subjects, but is there a common thread in all of them?
There seems to be a common thread, which is that there's always this nice Jewish girl from the Midwest who lands in New York, where she finds love and career success. And even though I keep trying to have an imagination.
You keep telling that story over and over again?
Yeah, and there's always a great shrink. There's always a brilliant shrink in the middle who says really good adages.
What was the most valuable lesson you learned about writing or life or whatever, and from whom?
You know, I would say the shrink who I mentioned, who's an addiction specialist, who's the hero of the book Lighting Up, and also my recent fun novel Speed Shrinking. He really, really helped me get off of addictions, and which unlocked my success, because really the drinking and the smoking and the partying was not helping me at all. And I once said to him, because took me so many years to finally get a book deal and be successful. I said, how do I stay successful and clean and happy? And he said to me, lead the least secretive life that you can. And I love that, and that sort of became my mantra. And hilariously, I told my dad, who's a doctor in West Bloomfield, Michigan, and his response was, he's exactly wrong. And he emailed me and he said, it's actually, the truth is that repression is the greatest gift of the human intellect.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, Dad, I'm stealing that for my next book.
So was this person talking about in terms of your writing or in terms of your living, or both?
Both. And I think that what happens with addicts and also with people with a lot of other kinds of psychological issues is that there's a big ugly secret in the middle of your life, and you're not honest, you don't look at it, you don't deal with it, you hide it, and then it just becomes bigger and weirder. And so lead the least secretive life you can in every way. So in my writing, I try to get deeper and darker and more honest, and in my life, I try to do that, and it just turns out to be the best advice anyone ever gave me.
So now you're teaching at NYU and also at the New School?
Yeah, I teach at the New School. I teach a great class, writing for New York City newspapers and magazines, and I teach these great seminars, which I call the instant gratification take too long seminars, which is basically the goal of the class is to write and publish a great piece by the end of the class to pay for the class. And I've had so many thousands of students that have gotten published that it's just very, very fun.
Tell me about some of your success stories.
Well,
some of your favorite success stories.
Some of my favorite success stories. One of my former students, Abby Scher, wrote. I always give the assignment, write a humiliation essay about the most humiliating thing that ever happened to you. And Abby published a great many of her pieces, and one of them was in Self magazine about how she cured her OCD, and she got $4,000 for the piece, so she more than covered the class. And then she got a 6-figure deal from Scribner's for a beautiful memoir called Amen, Amen, Amen that recently came out. And I think I've been doing this so long, I have 42 students who've had books come out.
Wow.
Novels, memoirs. And the joke is that I always said in my classes, if you sell an assignment for $1,000, I get dinner. But then if you sell a book deal, I always promised all my students I would give them a blurb and endorse it. And my editor calls me a blurb whore because my name is on 43 books. But 3 of my students had the nerve to get bestsellers and do better than me.
Oh my God.
So now I have a new rule where they have to come back and give me a blurb. So I have 3 students who've now given me blurbs.
Now, you started out, you had your job at the New Yorker, but at some point you had the courage to leave and became basically a freelancer. That's pretty hard. How does one manage to survive as a freelancer?
Teaching really helped, and actually my husband's a great TV film writer, and he's also a professor at NYU, and I think we both feel that doing something along with writing helps. And another former student of mine, Marcy Alboa, wrote a great book called One Person, Multiple Careers. Mm-hmm. And I actually highly recommend that, especially these days. I think it's really good to do one thing to pay the bills and then follow your passion at the same time. So that's what I usually recommend. And a lot of my students wind up getting internships and jobs editing and proofreading and copy editing and doing journalism when they'd really rather be writing fiction. So the teaching really wound up saving me.
What's the single most important bit of advice that you would offer to an aspiring writer?
This is a really weird one, but people say to me, what's the secret? I've sold 7 books in 7 years, and what's the secret of your success? And I would actually say that I'm not afraid to suck, is my advice, because as my cousin Howard said, right, page a day is a book a year, and my first drafts are not good, but I don't show my first drafts to any editors or agents. So it doesn't have to be brilliant. I always say to my students, just get it on the page. That's your job, and my job as a teacher is to tell you where your poetry is until you start at page 3 and to cut it. I'm very lucky. I have great writing groups and great editors who will, ghost editors sometimes actually, who I'll do a first draft and it's not good, but they'll tell me how I can make it better. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to be able to hear criticism and take it, but I'm extremely good at taking criticism. So I think that's really part of the trick is don't pressure yourself so that when you get it on the page, it has to be brilliant. It doesn't have to be brilliant.
Just get it on the page.
Just get it on the page first. That's your first step.
Or somebody said, just get your ass in the seat and, and start typing.
Right, and also a lot of people who come to me I do these great How to Sell Your First Book seminars, and what I say to them is stop trying to write 300 pages. First, write an essay, a 3-page essay, and publish that essay about your book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or self-help, and quite often that completely launches the book, and they wind up getting agents and editors calling them. So 3 pages is doable.
So what's your next book?
Actually, I'm writing a book with the brilliant addiction therapist that I mentioned called Unhooked, How to Quit Anything Quickly. And he really unlocked my success. So it's hilarious because we've now switched roles. So now I have to unlock him and show him how to do a book. So that's
well, actually, as you know, I came to one of your events that you held for, aspiring writers, and where you expose them to editors and agents and other writers who had recently gotten over the hurdle. So I know how generous you are, with your time.
By the way, I always say it's not because I'm generous, it's because it makes me look good and then my classes fill up more.
Well,
and
there
also,
you go.
truthfully, I have stolen the editors of a few of my students.
Really?
Yes.
So now
that's
we
the
know
trick.
that you're really a predator.
Yes.
Well, I look forward to your next book, and I think it's great, what you're doing, because I think so many people want to write, and they don't know how to. They don't know how to do it.
Yeah, and by the way, people can email me. Because I quit all my addictions, I'm now addicted to email.
Okay.
So www.susanshapiro.net, and people can ask me their writing questions.
Okay.
And I can recommend classes.
That's wonderful. We're out of time. I want to thank Susan Shapiro for joining us today. And as she said, to find out more about her books, and her writing courses, go to her website, www.susanshapiro.net. For the City University of New York and 1-to-1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.